Hello and welcome to another episode. We are a show that likes to highlight and just spread information about topics of nutrition and behavior. I am your host, Teree Perkins, and we have an expert here, Mr. Craig Gordon. He has been working in the field and he has a lot of experience in the field of nutrition, biochemistry, addiction, behavior, and disease. He has an organization that he's been running for a long time, and it's called NEAD, and that stands for Nutrition and Exercise versus Addiction and Disease. So thank you, Craig. Today's topic is going to be how poor nutrition drives crime and violence. Now this one I'm excited for because I don't think it's talked about enough. So let's get right into it.
Thank you very much, Terry. I've been studying the relationship between diet, addiction, disease, crime, and violence for 44 years. Early on, my mother was a prescription heroin addict. She would eat basically the crappy food, get migraine headaches, and complain to her doctor about the pain. And so they prescribed Demerol and Dilaudid like it was candy for a very, very long time. This goes back to the late 60s. So she's no longer with us. I had a girlfriend who was probably a 5th or 10th generation Irish alcoholic. And every 15 times or 10 times she was drinking, she'd turn right into Lucifer.
Oh, man.
Have you ever seen somebody turn from a lamb to a monster in 3 or 4 or 5 drinks? I know I have. So crime and violence is driven primarily by poor biochemistry. Have the kids use the word hangry. And I have a sign that says, "I'm sorry what I said to you when I was so hungry." And then you've got all sorts of things like junk food and sugar are the gateway drugs. Now think about that. Everybody thinks it's marijuana, they think it's cigarettes, they think it's beer. It's not, it's sugar. So I say things like, please don't love your grandkids with sugar. I talk about, my friend Barbara, who wrote this book called Food and Behavior. She wrote that 20, 30 years ago, was a probation officer, and learned about nutrition back when, and did amazing things, and did studies and so forth. We'll get into that later. So I have here another piece, Diseases Due to Sugar Poisoning, written in 1910.
Wow.
A doctor in Ithaca, New York, was probably learning about how sugar affected his patients for 30 years, from 1880 to 1910, and finally got sugar literate and started taking his charges or his patients off of white flour, white sugar, and processed stuff, at least as processed as it was back then. And lo and behold, a bunch of the symptoms and issues and maladies were disappearing, like poof, gone.
Wow.
Just eliminating certain things out of a young person's diet. So that's a big deal. That was 113 years ago.
Wow.
I did not make this up. I did not think this up. So then you got the list of blood sugar disorders, which is long and difficult. And I've been into prisons where we, pull out a blood sugar disorder checklist. And we start with, the typical ones that are on a couple of my signs: exhaustion, depression, irritability, anxiety, nervousness, constant worrying, headaches, insomnia, just for starts.
Right.
And those are miserable. And so then you get into all the other stuff, and hypoglycemia is ruling your roost and the tail wagging your dog, and you don't know it. You think it's normal because nobody's ever brought it up to you. Nobody's ever helped you connect those dots.
Right.
Nobody's ever seen it.
So let's get into the slide, because I feel like that the first slide is perfect for what you were talking about.
So it says, could the typical American diet be the basis for crime? And I say after 44, 45 years, absolutely. So you'd be hard-pressed to find an addict, an alcoholic, or a criminal that doesn't have a bad problem with their biochemistry and isn't grossly malnourished.
Mm-hmm.
You know, have you ever heard of a healthy addict, alcoholic, or criminal? No. I seriously doubt it. So junk food and sugar is the most common form of child abuse. Think about that. You know, from the day we're born, we associate pain, pleasure, reward, and behavior modification with sugar and treats.
Right.
Please don't love your grandkids with sugar. And that's the way it is in this country to this day. You go to the supermarket, and people have mountains of cereal that's loaded with sugar, and milk that has milk sugar, and all the soda, I call it, for soda pop. And do you think all these things affect your brain? And with kids, affect their ability to learn, their capacity,
Right.
the way they process information, when they're wired to beyond belief with all this sugar? And, you know, it's fine, they have energy for a little while, then it drops like a rock. And then their blood sugar's low. Then they start suffering from these different symptoms. And then they're not comfortable. So if they're not comfortable, and all these things affect their brains, so if your fuel supply for your brain is low and erratic, guess what? Just like another sign I have, it says if your diet is polluted and dead, guess what? This isn't that hard to understand. It's so simple, it goes right over people's heads. They are so stuck with their isms and their habits. That's their reality. That's their experience. I'm not making them wrong. I'm saying that there are consequences. I'm saying that these things actually help drive crime and violence and aggressive behavior.
Right.
So we don't need to be, pulling out a gun when somebody winks at your girlfriend. You know, so many people don't do any of this stuff unless they start with some alcohol, and then there's drugs, then there's cigarettes, I call sugarettes, and then there's vaping. And all these things do is piss off your very delicate endocrine system and your body, and affects how you think and you feel, and you're in trouble, and you don't know it. So.
Right, so you have another slide that talks more so about the link between crime and violence, so we'll put that one up.
It says violence and crime is directly related to hypoglycemia, a form of malnutrition. And it says, ask any criminal. And when will the criminal justice system take this seriously? They still don't. I talk till I'm blue in the face. They don't listen. They don't do anything different. I've been in the courts, I've talked to the judges, I've talked to the prosecutors, I've talked to all sorts of people, politicians. They want to do something about crime. They refuse to take this seriously. They refuse to act upon the information. They're stuck. I'm so sad to see. And this is how we could protect all sorts of people from violent crimes, for advocate for innocent people. This is how we could prevent crime. This is how we could put teeth in doing something about violence and crime. So
let's talk a bit more about the current measures that are in place regarding like crime and how they deal with it. And I know that Barbara's book also got into it too, if you wanted to speak more on that.
Well, Barbara's book is not well publicized, not well received, even though it nails the hammer on the nail of the head. It's like, oh my God.
Right.
So back when Barbara in the 70s was a junior probation officer, and she was learning about all the crime and trying to help her people, help her charges. And she learns about nutrition because she was having a hard time herself. Learns about nutrition, starts to apply what she learned to herself, does so well with it, she learned a lot more, and eventually gets a PhD in nutrition,
Wow.
and starts to use these techniques and protocols on her charges, on her probationees. And does so well at it that, and it was so successful, the judge, she would be standing next to her charge in front of the judge. Judge would say, you do exactly what Barbara tells you in this book, and there's this book, and there's this other book. This book's called Food and Behavior, okay? And the other book is the Nutritional Guidelines for Correcting Behavior. So this is all a very clear roadmap on how to do this successfully. Right. Barbara does another study for 5 years, 1,100 adults and juveniles, first and second offenders, standing in front of the judge. Judge says you got to do what she tells you. Barbara's real nice about it, has it all laid out. And 1,100 people later, 5 years later, normally the people standing in front of judge are going to get rearrested between 60 and 80% of the time in the next 2 years.
Wow.
Upon their release from their first round.
What's the name for that?
That's called recidivism.
Right.
Recidivism is actually the biggest word in criminal justice. If we didn't have recidivism, boy, would it be a different story. But we do, and nobody pays attention to nutrition. Nobody gets them out there walking every day and getting exercise,
Right.
which is how we apply the good nutrition. And here we go again. So, if you don't take care of the body doesn't take care of the brain. The brain makes bad decisions. You get addicted to something. You're doing some other, monkey business. Who knows what it is? And you wind up in trouble.
Right.
So Barbara's thing, the normal population, 60 to 80%, depending on where you live, are back in front of the judge. She did her thing. Guess how much? 89% of those people doing Barbara's program over 5 years never went back in front of a judge.
Nice.
So that more than turned the statistics, which are people and their families, upside down. So that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
So how simple is that? And here are the two books, laying it out, simple as pie, no pun intended, simple as could be. Here we go.
Right.
Done. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to, do a massive study and waste another 5 years to figure this out. It's done. It's here.
And
what else?
Even though that book, was written when it still applies because over time, even the 2009 study that we talked about in another episode, that one was fairly recent as well.
Well, that was another study about violence and aggression. And after 40 years of scientific data gathering, and then the compilation at the end, the quote was, there is a robust relationship between childhood confectionery consumption and adult violence and aggression. So here we go again.
Right.
A 40-year study done in Britain. They'd never do that here. In certain ways, the Brits are way more sophisticated than we are. In certain ways.
In certain ways.
The diet thing, I don't think so. Remember, your level of health and fitness is your real IQ test. Very simple. I'm not making people wrong. I want them to think about it. I want them to say, hey, I've got one life. I want to be a good example for my family. I want to step out of the way of law enforcement. Violence is basic stupidity. And we're going to get in a lot of trouble, and our life's going to be thrown under a bus if we don't take care of ourselves. If we do, we lose some of the bad habits. We start taking health seriously. A lot of these problems disappear. This is another piece done that mentions Barbara's name. It was Sugar's Bitter Harvest, written in the London Times in 1983.
Oh, wow.
Connecting all the sugar consumption with the youth and violent crime in England. And it was ugly. And it's ugly here. And it just keeps getting worse.
So you have a slide on violence as well, if you could refer to that.
So it says good nutrition can stop violence. This is not rocket science. So in Bridgeport, for instance, I've talked to hundreds of people, and I've said to them, have you ever heard the two words nutrition and violence in the same conversation? And almost nobody ever said or thought that they ever heard those two words in the same conversation. So they're going up and down the streets and in parades and in protest. They're talking to the mayor, they're talking to the cops, they're talking to social workers, they're talking to public health, they're talking all over the place. Blah, 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 blah. Everything but nutrition.
That needs to be added to the conversations.
Well, you would think.
Yeah.
Because Barbara was no fool.
Right. She was right there
She
working
proved
with
it up, down, sideways. She documented it. She did studies. She wrote about it. She road mapped it. It's there. I've been talking about her and her stuff for years. Nobody's listening. How many times people like all these OD things, all the drugs, all the alcohol, all the cigarettes, all the vaping, all the coffee. You know, maybe a little bit of coffee is okay. Not a lot, and not loaded with sugar and dairy. So, that shouldn't be breakfast. That should be something beside your breakfast. Get a protein, get a complex carb, get something half decent in your stomach so that you could think and function like a normal human being or a student.
So let's focus more towards that nutrition. So you're saying crime and violence. How does poor nutrition drive crime and violence? So what is good nutrition? Let's focus on that a little more.
Well, take some energy and effort and learn about nutrition. Read about it, learn about it, start to look at food differently. Start to look at food as medicine instead of it's just a convenient distraction. Start to look at sugar for what it really is, and it's a disaster. Start to wean yourself away from sugar and sweet treats and all the sodas and the alcohols and everything, because it's all sugar. Wine and beer is fermented sugar. Alcohol is magnified sugar. Drunk is deep sugar shock. Really simple. And watch out for diabetes, because you can drink yourself into diabetes. And the cigarettes are very similar. You can smoke yourself into diabetes. And you put those irritants in your system every day, you're in trouble. You might not know it, but you're in trouble.
Just briefly, I wanted to speak on like the sneaky sugars too, because you've mentioned before eating more simple foods because they add sugar to like everything,
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Well, so ultra-processed food is everywhere. It's convenient. It's easy. It's, like the microwave stuff. Should you microwave your stuff? No. Do we do it out of convenience? Absolutely. Yes. So, it changes the food. And typically those processed foods are already adulterated and processed and heated and cooled some more, mixed up. You got chemicals they add to it for shelf life, for the preservatives and the extrapolators and whatever they do. And then they add sugar to it because sugar's cheap and they make a big profit on it, and you get addicted to it.
Right.
You're addicted to another perverted source of energy. Here we go again. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's just a disaster in progress. Nobody's adding 2 + 2 and getting 4. And, how can you represent this to people if you don't do it yourself? So there's another big problem with people being hypocrites. How can you say, that this stuff is bad, and you just got off your cigarette break with your coffee? How can you say, that sugar is bad, and it's really a bad idea for a youth at risk, for instance, and you just fed your grandkids, pie, cookies, and cake.
Right.
It's like, duh. And so we have this built-in ego issue, and we don't want to be hypocrites, so you don't even want to confront these situations and think that it applies to you and your family. Oh no, that's not the way it works. It works the way I want it to, at my schedule, on my convenience, and that doesn't matter. That's just long-term stuff. We can do whatever we want now, and then the kids pay later.
So you have another slide, and I'll let you read it, but here's it's going to come up on the screen.
It says, if your food is polluted and dead, guess what? I think you all are plenty smart enough to understand what I mean by that. And so, where's the upside of that? Do you think that's you're being fair to yourself when you eat processed food constantly? And it's like, let's go to Mickey D's, or let's go to Popeye, or let's go here, let's go there, and buy some more sugar, buy some more processed meat, buy some more, industrial chemicals they actually put in our food. And over like 20 years, you actually ingest a whole barrel full of industrial chemicals through your body. And you might put through your body 800 to 1,200 pounds of sugar, sometimes tons of sugar, over 20, tons of sugar. And then the salt. For people of Latin descent, they love salt. And look how well that's working for with hypertension and with high blood pressure. So these all, chop segments of your life down. So you lose your lifespan decreases, your quality of life decreases, you get sick more often, and it's all because you want to put like a bunch of salt, a bunch of sugar, a bunch more sugar, a bunch of chemicals, and on and on and on. Where's the upside to that? How does that benefit you? And we need to think longer term.
Right.
We can't think now and next week. We got to think, next year and 10 and 20 years from now. And how does this work? Because the time goes by like a missile. It's going by at 3,000 miles an hour. Boom, done. You're 10 years older. Oh, look what happened. I put on 20 pounds. That 20 pounds is a disaster for your body.
Right.
And, there's people that are thin that are just as sick as fat people.
Yeah.
Okay? There's something called TOFI, which is an acronym for thin outside and fat inside. So thin people can be sick too. Don't fool yourself. Don't think, oh, I could smoke, I can drink, I look healthy. I can work an 8-hour day. Yeah, there's lots of functional people that work to afford their habits. Hopefully they're good habits, not bad, but most of the time they're not good habits. So here we go again.
So let's do a recap, because we've covered a lot today, but let's do a recap. So what did we talk about?
There's a whole lot of different things that we don't hear from the public, from education, from criminal justice, from our parents, that cause an enormous amount of trouble. We need to educate the kids and the young parents about how nutrition is such a big deal in the development of children. So that. Third, I have these books. I have information on this. I do speaking, obviously. And, I have catalogs with all my signs. Signs can be put up in classrooms. They can be put on, refrigerators. They could be part of your homeschooling. They could be part of various programs on alcohol and drug abuse in schools, and they are not. I know that for a fact. I've sat in on DARE programs. I've taught DARE programs. I've done all sorts of things. I did work for the White House on drug abuse policy in the mid-'80s. So I've been immersed in this, thinking about it, coming up with answers and solutions, and helping people move toward, being happy, healthy, productive society members rather than anything but. So it's not that hard to figure out.
Right. So we have another slide, and we're coming to a close as well, but I wanted you to touch on this slide as well.
So it says really high caliber health is how we effectively prevent crime. There's tremendous evidence behind this statement. So you got Barbara, you got my friend Joan, you've got myself with 44 years in the trenches studying this. You've got all sorts of research that backs it up. And if we got out in front of this and started to take nutrition seriously as a tool to help us prevent rather than anything but, it's a big deal. So we can move forward, we can do what we have to do, we can make huge strides in doing something about crime and disease and mental health issues, things like racism, things like inequality, build people's capacity to function at a much higher level without alcohol and drugs, without having to resort to violence and aggressive behavior. Don't need it, don't want it. Choice is yours.
And like you said in another episode, don't believe us, but do your research as well.
I can provide research. There's other people. One of my signs says it's a short hop from starch and sugar to alcohol and drugs. It's like, here are my 2 feet. Boop. Just went 2 inches to the right when you're about 14 to 16 years old, and you just graduated from junk food and sugar to beer and cigarettes.
Right.
Simple as that.
Well, thank you, Craig. We covered a lot today. Definitely an interesting topic that I'm sure not a lot of people are super aware of. I want to plug in NEAD while we have a few seconds left of the show, which is his organization. So you have a website, and how can people contact you shortly?
Well, it's neadusa.org. My phone number's on the screen. If you want to call me and book me for a speak engagement, I can do that. I can provide all sorts of information for an educational entity to start to take this seriously and move forward on it.
Right. So thank you, Craig. Definitely check out his information on his website, and stay tuned for our next episode, which is going to be, what are the biggest words in addiction and criminal justice? Thank you.